Okay, friends, welcome. I am here with a very special guest, Jim Morningstar, PhD. Jim is the Director of Transformations Incorporated. Jim has a licensure in clinical psychology, and he's been doing that work since the 1970s, has pioneered in the integration of psychotherapy with such mind-body techniques as therapeutic breathwork and biospiritual energetics. He founded the School of Integrative Psychology in 1980 and the Transformations Breathwork program in 1990 and has authored 5 books. He is the co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance. Jim's 33 years of courses in integrative psychology are available online and through his training programs, 4 levels of breathworker certification that can be obtained as a professional breathworker. Jim also teaches internationally. Welcome, Jim. I'm so excited
Oh,
to have you.
it's such a
Hello.
joy to be here with you, Chauna.
Yes, 100 times yes. Okay. Will you tell us about one of the first experiences you had with breath work that you can remember?
Actually, this house that I'm living in right now, we've been in 45 years. And when we first moved into a house, we said, what do we do with all this room? So we had other people living here. And we said, we'll dedicate the 3rd floor, which is more of an attic, to, in a room that we have there, to traveling spiritual teachers. And so the first breath workers that came to where I live, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, were in the upstairs attic. And my first session, which was truly liberating, it was opening up. And before that, though, I had been taught the power of breath through work with Alexander Lowen in Bioenergetics. And I had a regular Monday evening bioenergetics group going. And after I had my own breathwork session, I went to teach my regular bioenergetics class. And one of the women in the class, as we were standing in a circle, just plopped down on the floor and started breathing heavily. And I was like, Now, I either tell her to stop doing that, or I coach her to breathe as I had been coached in my breathwork session, which is what I did in front of the whole group. And so after my first breath work, I became a breath worker. It was like, okay, spirit is telling me something here. But of course, that wasn't like, oh, now I'm a breath worker. But I was committed then to go to every training I could, find every place where I would be educated by people who had experience in it. So we put the family on an airplane. I think the first training we went to was during Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And it was wonderful. We had our children there. And so that just started this whole lifelong journey. Back then, I was kind of a smart aleck, and I thought, this is the most magnificent thing, but probably next month I'll be on to something else, we'll be doing other things. Well, breath hasn't let me go. I have not found anything that takes you as high or takes you as deep as breath. There's everything, though, that can go with it. And that's the difference with my school of breathwork or therapeutic breathwork. So we invite people to bring all of their skills in and to combine breathwork with it. It will enhance everything. It's not like, oh, you just have to breathe one certain way and not do anything else. No, I love the synchronicity of it. In fact, Alexander Lowen, who I'd studied with before in the bioenergetics, was a big student of breath. And he noticed that in the developmental stages of life, people pick up certain themes depending on the stage they were going through. I mean, the first is just existence itself. Do you stay alive? And are you basically safe in your body and in the world? And people who have trauma during that, or the second stage of, is there enough for me? Or the third stage, do I have freedom of movement? And or the fourth stage, do I have freedom to express my feelings fully? Or the fifth stage, do I have freedoms of my sexual orientation and identity? Or the sixth stage, can I have intimacy? People who had trauma in each of these areas breathe differently. And there are ways that could help them not just breathe harder, faster, but bioenergetic exercises that we use for each of those stages to help people mobilize their breath, integrate their body, mind, and spirit, and get the gifts of that particular stage that they're here in this lifetime to share with others.
Wow. Two things I'd like to circle back to in what you just said. Will you explain to those who are unaware, what is bioenergetics, please?
Well, bioenergetics is a form of therapy. Originally, the main proponent of bioenergetics is Alexander Lowen. He was a student of Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich knew that in order to free people and liberate people, you had to get into their bodies, because that's where the holding patterns are, not just in their head. And so he would use heavy pressure, he would use voice, he would use movement. Two of his students who were more well known were John Parakas and Alexander Lowen. John Parakas' wife was a psychic, and John Parakas went more into the psychic nature of bioenergetics. And he would read auras of people and help them. He would look at the breathing patterns, and he would actually do drawings of people's energy fields and where they had blockages. And that was his gift. Alexander Lowen's wife was a physical therapist. And so he learned how to use movement and exercises that would help liberate the breathing. And so he taught the different types of breathing and the patterns and the themes. It wasn't just breathing differently, it's how you saw life. It's what your major themes were. If your major theme is, I'm not safe in my life or in my body, well, you do life very differently. You spend as much time out of your body as you can. But while you're there, you can do some pretty nifty things. Like some of the greatest artists and theoreticians and people who had mental capabilities and psychic sensitivities, what I call the stage. They drew paintings like the Starry Night, seeing energy fields in the world, but they were also in a struggle with their own bodies, like cutting your ear off. This is what I loved about that approach to breath work, is finding what works for each person and reading it. What is the body telling me right now versus what do I think this person should be doing? As breath workers, our body is our instrument. What am I experiencing and feeling while I'm with you right now?
So the second thing I wanted to talk about is combining breath work. A lot of people come to breath work, specifically breath work trainings, with something else already. Maybe it's yoga, or they're dietitians or death workers. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how, I know you said, I wrote it down, that breath work will enhance anything. Will you just talk a little bit about combining that, combining breath work into an existing practice? And then the second part that I'm going to ask is how you ended up combining breath work into your psychotherapy. So if those are the same answer, just give you a
Okay.
heads up.
Yeah. Well, we've had dentists. We've had one of our breath workers is teacher is a carpenter. There's what I call formal breath work, which is we have a contract to set aside a particular time in your life, if you were asking me to do a session with me, we would set aside a specific time to work with the breath and put it like under a microscope and just see how the breath is affecting your thoughts, your feelings, your spirit. That's a formal session. Okay. Then there's informal breath work, and that is how we're breathing as we walk around in life. And how do we become aware of other people's breathing? How do we help them be at ease in their skin, in their breath? So a dentist does not necessarily have a person get out of the chair and lay down on a mat and do an hour session. A dentist will notice the person stiffening, and he might ask them to gently to take a breath and relax into it. Or even if they can't do that, he'll keep breathing, because often when someone else is tense in our presence, we will tense up. And so that's by being a breath worker as a dentist. And we've had it. In fact, one of our people in our community specialized in people with dental trauma. And people would come to him from all over because he knew how to help them go through a dental procedure without trauma. In fact, one of the breath workers in our community right now is a financial advisor. And she combines use of the breath and working with couples or individuals in order to be more resourceful as they're thinking about planning their financial future. So I love this. This is what takes breath into all of life, and not just keep it for those who just are personal growth junkies. We do have a lot of massage therapists, a lot of body workers, but also a lot of counselors, coaches, and psychotherapists. And that was a natural for me. That's, in fact, what got me back into doing psychotherapy, is because I now had a bigger toolbox. It's not like I just advertise myself as a breath worker. I'm a coach, but I noticed, I mean, even if we didn't get into formal breath work, I would ask people, well, what do you notice about your breathing right now? This is not a criticism, but just so that they become aware, oh, they started to talk about some abusive thing in their life, and all of a sudden, they weren't breathing very much. And so they begin to pair then that I'm walking around with a 24/7 biofeedback mechanism called my breathing. And it will tell me when I am starting to clench, when I'm starting to tighten, when when an emotional area has come up for me that I am uncomfortable with. And it will remind, oh yeah, let your shoulders down, take a breath. And then I'm a lot more resourceful. It doesn't give me all the answers. It doesn't immediately tell me what to say or do, but it helps me tap into my innate wisdom, my higher self, my natural intelligence. Breath partners beautifully with that.
That's wonderful. I actually don't know the answer to this question. Do you still see private breathwork clients on a regular basis?
Yes, but much less than I did. I guess it was kind of like the Energizer Bunny, probably where you are at in your stage of your career right now. Your schedule is full. My schedule is still full, but for me, what keeps me sharp and keeps me humble. Every client that comes in teaches me something new. Every client is my teacher. In fact, I think that spirit is outside the door, sending in the next client for what I need. So that's the difference between psychotherapy and talking about transference and countertransference. And the psychotherapist should be a tabula rasa, a blank slate that has no feelings or opinions about anything. Well, that's unrealistic. Of course we do. But there's a synchronicity between what's going on in a session for the breath worker and the breath workee. Now, we still have a role to play. It's not like all of a sudden we lay down and start breathing with them and telling them our troubles or something, Yeah, we still have a contract and a role to play of holding space, but knowing how to do that and being aware that we're both student and teacher at the same time. Like I said, it's very humbling. I remember having a mom sent her teenage daughter to work with me, and I thought we were just doing great. It came to be an hour. She looked at her phone, got up, and walked out. That's done. I was like, oh, she was just here to fulfill her mother's requirement that she go to therapy, or otherwise she wouldn't get her allowance. It's like, oh, okay. Now, I still
Yes.
think she got something. Seeds were planted somewhere, but they were pretty deep because she was on to the next thing like that.
Oh, breathwork and our clients keeping us humble. Yes to that. Yes. Okay, we are running out of time, so I'm going to keep moving, even though I definitely scribbled down a couple of things there about breathwork keeping us humble, breathwork keeping us sharp. Every client is my teacher. I really agree with that, and I think it's a really beautiful way of saying, of the idea that while we're learning, we still have to hold the space. Which brings me to the next question. How do you define holding space?
First of all, it's about staying in my center, staying in the center of loving oneness rather than in my opinions, my beliefs, my ideas about what's a good session was. I always laugh that in the old days, a breathwork session was usually at least 2 to 3 hours, because that's how long it took me to get someone to look like I think they should look at the end of the session. And finally, I got no. A session maybe just opening the door for someone. Now, I like to keep people be regulated so they can walk out the door and knowing that they have contact. If they have problems in between, they can certainly contact me, because I believe holding space is before a session, during a session, and after a session. I continue to hold that person in the space of love and light, even if they press my buttons, even if they walked out the door like the young, And so if I can keep that inner centeredness with me, then I can also do that for them. And I can allow the container to be a place where they can explore and share areas that might have been too scary for them to even look at themselves, because they know that I have their back, so to speak, their best interests at heart. And so they can let go of their guardedness, even to keep themselves from experiencing too much or knowing too much. And so that holding space means physically that I've created a space like you did today. The dog and the kids aren't running in, and we create a space that physically is a safe container. It's the womb. So the safe space is we are creating a womb for a rebirth.
Will you share a bit about your pre and post breathwork routines before you see a client or after you see a client? Are there any rituals that you do?
It's become more or less second nature to me now, because when I walk in the room that we're doing a session, I have already prepared myself to be in that sacred space. So it doesn't take a long time. Now, in the beginning, I would breathe a little bit. I might read over notes. I might remind myself of what that person wanted, and that happens almost instantaneously for me now. And I feel like when they leave, they are now part of my spiritual family. And so they're in my prayers, they're in my loving intentions, whether they like it or not.
That's wonderful. Okay. Well, will you share, if anything, what has changed in the way you facilitate since you started up to now? Like, what have you made any shifts? Have you made any discoveries? What have you gotten better at saying no to or yes to?
Yeah. Well, more and more it's become apparent that presence is our major tool. So I probably did a lot more technique in the beginning. Like I said, I love the bioenergetic exercises. I will still use them, but I'll only use them if a person really gets stuck, or a person is like unable to take a full breath, and then I might use some of that. But more or less, just knowing that presence, and it's not my presence, it's the presence that I invoke of spirit to come in. I tell trainees in my training that there are many people who will respond much more to your silent instructions than your verbal instructions. So just being a champion and a cheerleader for them silently, I will notice, for example, the person is tight in their shoulders or whatever, and I will, rather than having to say, no, let your shoulders relax and breathe into them, I'll just have that thought, and pretty soon their shoulders are relaxing and breathing into them. It's like, thank you, Spirit. In fact, some people will actually resist or take it as a criticism. And, so the using spirit to communicate is more and more part of my work with people.
In closing, Jim, thank you so much for this. I would really love to hear about your work in the Middle East, North Africa regions. If you talk about that, please.
Mm-hmm. I asked myself at one point, where could I be of greatest service on the planet? And it came that the hotbed of ancestral conflict was often located in the Middle East. So I just had that thought and that intention. And not long afterwards, I was contacted by a breath worker in the Middle East who was interested in studying with me. And we formed a friendship, and he wanted to bring more of the kind of therapeutic breath work that I do to the Middle East, North Africa. And so he began to organize, and I would do video conferencing trainings with him. And it became apparent that the forerunners, the people that are willing to explore and experience new things, change the consciousness and change the lifestyle of life, were women. I think if you look around the world, you'd see that. The women often take that leadership. And then men get the idea and they'll come along. But it's like women's consciousness is more open. Men is more like the focused, going after the antelope. Whereas women are more, let's keep the family safe. And it still is true today. We have a few men that come in, but it's mostly women who are taking leadership and putting breath work into their other practices, and becoming the change agents, as it were, in the Middle Eastern countries and North African countries. So I've loved that work, and we continue to do that. Omar Chetui and myself have exchanged breath work with each other, so we had to do that and learn to work with our differences and actually capitalize on them, because the closer we become, the more that energy creates that safe container for our students.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and doing this interview. Thank you for all that you're contributing to the course. I am incredibly honored to have your voice and your wisdom as a part of our learning experience. Is there anything else you would like to share with the future facilitators? Any notes or words of encouragement or make sure use?
Well, this is my commercial. Okay, if you're ready for the commercial, and that is a daily practice. There's nothing more valuable of which I'm aware than a commitment to some form of daily breathwork practice yourself. It will not just keep you fresh and alert, but it will keep you informed. And people went through 3 years of my school of integrative psychology, and I said, if the only thing you got after 3 years was a daily practice, your time was well spent. Yeah. So Spirit will guide you, be with you every day, and I hold you and your students and the work you do in my heart and my prayers, Chauna.
Thank you so much.